Yeah, I was waiting. I was in a holding pattern there for a second. Well, we are live. It's 3:01. So how's everybody doing this afternoon? I just posted up the video comparing the 3800 V6 to the 4.8 liter 4800, I guess you will, V8. So we got V6 versus V8, both of them running the same blower and the same blower pulley. There was a little bit of a change in crank pulley, so we can talk about that. But we got lots of stuff to talk about on this one because we have, and today what I want to talk about on that video. Hopefully you guys are going to get a chance to go up and take a look at it. But what I want to talk about are the differences between the motors. So we have one where one of them is spinning the blower a little faster than the other, about 1,000 RPM, depending on what RPM we pick to kind of compare it at. We ran more engine speed with the 4.8 liter, so the difference can be even greater out there, but we just never ran the 3800 out to 7,000 RPM. So, you know, it wasn't, the 3800 wasn't wanting to make power out there, which kind of surprises me. And so we want to talk about that because when we talk about the differences between the motors, it seems like, at least on paper, the 3800 should want to rev higher than the 4.8 liter does. And yet it does not. It makes me think that there's something else going on. So, but the difference between the two is obviously the 3800 and a 3.8 liter and a 4.8 liter. Biggest difference is displacement. One of them is a V6, one of them is a V8. So the number of cylinders, which does come into play in more than just like one of them is bigger than the other one. It is. So bigger motors, easier to make power right off the bat. The other thing that happens, and we've talked about this a couple of times on this channel, and that's that if you have more cylinders, you have relatively more head flow. And the reason for that is you're breaking up the amount of power that you have to make per cylinder. So you can have less head flow because you're having to make less power in each cylinder because it's multiplied out by 8. So if we want to make 400 horsepower, that's 50 horsepower per hole in a V8. And it's more than that. I could do my calculation. It's 66.666 horsepower per hole on a V6. So the V6 heads have to flow more than a V8 head does to make the same amount of power. And so, like I said, relatively speaking, the V8 head flows more because it's easier for it to make that power because it's dividing it among, more cylinders. So that makes sense. So, we have, and the thing is, to compound this even further, we had as cast 706 heads, and we had ported L32 or L67s. Honestly, I can't remember which one that they were. I thought that they were the L32s, but I'd have to go back and verify that to make sure. But at any rate, we had ported heads. So we had ported V6 heads and as cast V8 heads, but the as cast V8 heads probably flow as much as the ported V6 heads do. And again, we have more cylinders, so relatively speaking, they flow even more. So for the head thing, it leans toward the V8. We also have intake manifold differences. On the 3800, we have the factory unported lower manifold. On the L32 blower, which is what we use on the Gen 5 blower, that manifold has a bigger opening in it, but the ports and everything I think are the same. So that manifold has two things. One is that on this particular one, we used an intercooler. So the 4.8 liter did not have an intercooler. The 3800 did. The 3800 underneath the intercooler has a kind of a big common plenum, but very, very short runners. Basically, they're just openings into the head port. So there's almost no intake runner length in the intake manifold. By contrast, the 4.8 liter has the high ram. So while we typically consider the high ram a short runner intake manifold in the LS world, certainly at least compared to the factory, either LS1, LS2, LS6, truck, Trailblazer SS, or fast manifolds, those are all long runner manifolds. The high ram is a shorter runner manifold because it's not as short as the low ram and not as short as the one that was used on this 3800 V6. So technically speaking, it has longer runners than the V6 did. So that will normally enhance power, at least in a portion of the curve, compared to the very short runner manifold, which doesn't have any reflected wave tuning in the RPM range that we were running. Might have second or tertiary reflected waves that could come into play, but really the runners are too short on that, and pretty typical of what we normally see on a roots blown. This is very typical for blower manifolds that are underneath these positive displacement blowers. They're very, very short. So you have that. And then we also have camshaft differences. So on these two motors, we ran the ZZP NIC camshaft, and I'm gonna go ahead and look that up. I think it's a 220, 230, but so yeah, so it is a 507 lift with the stock rockers and a 220, 230 at 50 and 112 LSA. So we compare that to the Truck Norris cam in the V8 and the 4.8 liter. And this was a Truck Norris NSR cam, which is about the same kind of lift, right near 500 lift, but a 212 to, I don't know, 20 something, 220X. So even if it had as much exhaust duration as the NIC cam in the V6, it doesn't have as much intake duration and has a much tighter lobe separation angle, 107.5. So theoretically, the V6 cam should want to allow and want to make power higher in the RPM range, especially when teamed with this very short runner manifold. Both of those should combine to want to push peak power high in the RPM range, on the V6, more so than on the V8. And yet we have power being produced much higher on the 4.8 liter. So let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? Do you think that is that a function of the head flow? Is that a function of maybe we're running out of blower flow? I don't think it's that, because I mean, maybe at that boost level, because we definitely have a difference in the amount of boost being supplied to each one of these, despite the fact that we're spinning them both with a 2.6 blower pulley. So we had about 12 pounds or 13 pounds on the V6 and only about 8.5 pounds on the V8. So, and that's not surprising, because we have a pretty significant difference in the naturally aspirated power output of the two motors. So we have a little over 400 horsepower, I think. No, 385, I think, was the NA power output on the V8. I'm going to go ahead and verify that. Yeah, 384 on the V8. So, and then probably, I'm thinking on our, I didn't verify the NA one, because we started out with a supercharger on that, but I'm thinking that it's going to be sub 300 on the NA 3800, all in with the ported head and cam and some kind of intake manifold on there. It's probably going to be 280, 290 or something. At any rate, it's probably 100 horsepower less. So the 100 horsepower is going to demonstrate itself or make itself known with this blower by having a lower boost level. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw a lower boost level. And then what that equates to is if the pressure comes down that the blower is having to work against, the flow rate goes up. And we saw a difference in power. We saw 450 basically for the V6 versus 485 for the V8. And I think, honestly, these two could get closer together as we get closer and closer to the absolute flow limit of that supercharger. So I think what we need to do is make the 3800 either bigger or make it more efficient as an NA motor. And there are ways that we could do that. I think a better intake manifold would go a long way. I think a different camshaft than that particular camshaft, something with more lift, and I'd like to see a different duration specs too. So all of that I think would help. So I think we could get these two, we could get the power, the NA or this boosted power up on the V6 as well. And I think if we did, like we want to do on the V8 anyways, we could get the power up on both of them with more inlet flow into the blower. Obviously we could put an intercooler on the V8 and change that. But given the closer that we get to the maximum airflow of the M90, the less things like an intercooler are actually going to help, probably, because we're not running a lot of boost on the V8, so we don't have a lot of charge temperature, so we don't have a lot of room to adjust the charge temperature to try to make things better. So let me know what you guys think. If you guys let me know if you guys have watch the video. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Depends. It's only been up there an hour or so, I think, is how long it has been up there. But it's good stuff though. I love this because today when I did this video is actually the first time that I've overlaid the boosted 4.8 liter run versus the boosted 3800 run. And it surprised me when I did overlay that for the first time. I was surprised. Hey, look, I was surprised. It surprised me that they were so close down low and that they diverged after 4,500 RPM, where the bigger motor started making more power. You'd think that the bigger motor would make more low speed power too, because it's bigger. And that's normally what happens. But that was not the case. So let's see how everybody's doing today. What's up, James? Admiral's in the house. Roxy Speed Shop. If I donated a K-Series motor, would you do a Big Bang K-Series? I already have a K-Series. I already have a K24, which we already did a whole bunch of testing with, and it's already slated for the Big Bang. But no, I appreciate the offer. Thought about making a spreadsheet or web page compiling all the runs you've done or showing what products produce what results for you? No, I haven't, because that would be way too involved. You're talking about 30 years or more worth of dyno results and thousands and thousands and thousands of runs. But that's why I do this channel, so that I can bring all that information to you guys. I thought you already did a Big Bang on a K-Series. No, we just ran boost on it. We made 600 or 600 or so, or maybe a little more than 600 horsepower with the K24 under boost. And then we put the thing that I wanted to do is put a ported head on it. Honestly, it probably doesn't even need it, but we tried. We did a bunch of NA combinations. We ran, stack injection and different skunk manifolds, headers, and different camshafts and stuff. And then we did run. I run a variety of different turbos on it, including the GT45 and the one from Robert over at Force Performance, who does good stuff. He does great stuff over there. I think we ran the S475 maybe on there too. And then the small precision turbo, which now is actually in my buddy's NSX, and he's getting ready to run it. Hopefully Jimmy will run it this week, and that thing's making some serious power. So it'd be cool to see what it runs at the track. Alternately, have you thought about doing a mega gauntlet of mods? What exactly do you mean by that, Sean? Just like spell it out for me so I know what you're talking about. Or maybe a B series. I did one Big Bang kind of before I introduced the Big Bang series on B16, but we broke something on the motor because I didn't put ring gap in it, and that's how we learned. I might sell my Z50 for 4,000. 3,800 running out of injector. No, we had more than enough injector. We had because if we ran out of injector, we would have broken it. But we had, I think, 80 pounders in that. 3,800 is floating the valves. We had valve springs in it. We had originally, when we started putting cams in, we had LS6 springs on it, the blue LS springs. And then we put 26 918s in it. So I don't think valve float was an issue. What's the difference on bore and stroke? I don't remember what the bore and stroke on a 4.8 liter is. 3,780 and 324 or 3,264, something like that. Why is it doing that? So a 3.8-inch bore and a 3/4-inch stroke. So it has about the same bore and more stroke, though. You said you wish that Holly could do VVT because you like the ability to advance and retard the cam to get the best power out of it. On VVT sized cams, because the problem is once you go to a certain amount of duration, you run out of piston to valve clearance and the ability to use VVT, the ability to swing it very much. Smaller cams, you could swing it more. And honestly, on VVT applications, they're not swinging it very much at wide open throttle, 7 or 8, 9 degrees maybe. They're swinging it a lot at part throttle and cruise to do various things, but not at wide open throttle. It's crazy how the stock from a supercharged version of the 3800 only makes 40 horsepower with roughly 7 pounds. I don't know what you mean by that. There's a difference between the NA version. The NA version has more compression too. So it's not 200 versus 240 horsepower. There's more to it than that. I see you use factory valve spring retainers when you swap to the LS6 valve springs. We usually use milled retainers on Cam 3800s with LS springs. Clearance must be good. We had no problem with retainer to seal clearance, if that's what you're talking about. Longtime subscriber Harley, what's going on? Thank you for what you do. I have a 3.8 liter 4G69 Mitsubishi. The car is well built, but approximately 300 in stock trim. That's pretty good. I've been trying to decide on M90 or a GT45. Well, there's a big difference between those two. A GT45 will make a couple, at least 100 more horsepower if you wanted to turn them up. But the M90 is good for this kind of power range. You know, if you wanted to add another 100 horsepower or 150 horsepower, but you're gonna have to come up with some way to adapt it, some sort of adapter plate like I made for this one. Holly can now use VVT, VCT on LS Hemi engines as well as on the Gen 1 and 2 Coyotes. I'll have to take a look at that and see. We like I said, you can't use VVT on a lot of the cams that I'm running on these LSs anyway. But and I know in talking to Brian, he said that they've tried VVT stuff on the Gen 3 and Gen 4 LS stuff, and they're just not nearly as responsive as they are on the direct injected Gen 5 stuff. The Coyote they've run at Westech, they have run VVT on the later Coyote stuff with Holly. Does anyone have any experience with snake eater injectors? I have some 1500s I've run with good luck. Been waiting until Black Friday to order them. They have a good sale going on. Just want to make sure before I get them. Mine I got from the guys at Snake Eater, and then I flow tested them, and they were good. And then we've run them a bunch. Did you overlay the air intake temperatures between the two? I don't know. I didn't. And now that you mentioned that, I need to go back and see and make sure I have. Well, I don't have air temperatures on the 4.8 liter anyway, so there's no way I could do that. How did the 3800 rev with the turbo? Let's see. I think it made peak power at the same engine speed, but we'll see. No, it actually ran out farther. So it ran all the way to 6,500. Plot test description. Same cam, same heads. So we had the lower intake manifold with just the gutted blower deal on it. So I wonder why it would rev higher on that than the... See, that's why it makes me want to revisit this thing and see what's going on. In reference to the Mega Gauntlet, finding the #1 mod combo for LS engines. Sean, there isn't that. There isn't one that's better than everything else. There's only lots and lots of choices that will all do the same thing or do different things that people have subjective opinions about. So do you want, like, is 14 inches of idle vacuum okay for you? Well, for some guys it is. For other guys, it's not. Some of them only want to make sure they have 20. Some of them don't care if they have 5. So whatever the optimum thing is wholly subjective on these. And that's why I wouldn't put anything out that says, hey, this is the best thing, because it's not. If I put an M90 on a 305, we'll have to increase the top ring gap. If you're going to increase ring gap, you do the top and the second ring gap. You increase both of them, but you may not have to. The thing is, you don't know what that ring gap is. But an M90 on a 305 isn't going to add, you're probably only going to run 7 or 8 pounds on that anyway. So it probably would be okay if you're going to, if the tune is right. I'd like to see what you could do on a Buick 3.8 liter, the vis-a-vis the Rover V8. The 215, okay. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. I heard you say you didn't have high intake temps on the 4.8. I don't know if I did on this latest one because we didn't monitor it. The temperature would be low at 8 pounds. At least I suspect it would be low at 8 pounds, because the temperature of the charge temperature is a function primarily of the boost pressure, because pressure is going to be what causes the rise in temperature. I think you'd have to be pretty bad off on your blower or whatever is supplying that pressure to really have a significant change in temperature just from inefficiency. Makes you think the blower can't keep up the demand of the motor. Me too, but when you think about it doing it okay on the 4.8 and not on the 3800, it makes me believe something else was going on. Because if anything, it should be able to continue to supply boost on the smaller, less powerful motor than it does on the bigger one. But we do have the other factor. What is the flow rate of that blower at that speed, at that pressure? Because all of those things help determine what the flow rate of the blower is. Ever do anything with an L8T? I haven't, only the L83. And then I have some data that the guys at Brian Tooley have done on L86s and LT1s and stuff, but not the L8T. What would it take to do a modern V6 comparison? Like what? Which one are in particular? Chevy, Ford, Dodge, Toyota, Nissan. All of those wouldn't work, because there's be no way to make all of those run on the dyno, at least not in any reasonable time frame and financial fashion. Red Storm, what's going on? That makes me sense. Thanks for the answering. Sorry, all the questions. This is all new to me. Gonna read up on idle vacuum now. Yeah, idle vacuum is just, it's more about drivability. So if people want a camshaft, and what a lot of guys will say, especially guys that might be new to it, well, I want to make, like, they want a 5.3 that makes 500 horsepower, but I also want to idle nice and good fuel mileage and be able to use that with a stock converter. Well, all of that stuff is not going to happen. You have to choose and pick the things that you're willing to, things you're willing to sacrifice. M90 on the trophy 4-cylinder, that's actually a good idea. Or the slant 6 or the slant 6 that would be good too, I think. Slant 6 deserves a blower. So does that 292 inline Chevy. And so does the Sprint turbo motor. It deserves an AMR 500. Chris Birdsong has a good new video on vacuum advance. Okay. That's kind of random, but customer wants to put a cam with 553 lift, but doesn't want to put new springs on the LY6 engine. I told him it's better with LS6 springs. If he has an LY6, the LY6 already has those springs on it. It just has a different version of the LS springs. At least the one that I had did. It already had those 550 lift springs, 553, whatever the thing is. Difference RPM from the M90 versus a turbo. Could it be driving the M90 supercharger? Well, again, the thing is that the M90 supplied the boost and RPM on the 4.8, but didn't do it on the V6. So we ran plenty of RPM with the V8, but not the V6. So I don't think it's the loss of the supercharger from driving it. I don't think. Trying to scroll back to see what people were talking about on the vacuum advance thing. I don't know what the vacuum advance has to do with what we're talking about today. Have a spare Aussie 3800 L36. Okay, that's the NA version. Long runner, large plumb manifold sitting on the shelf. Wish you were not halfway around the country. I'd like to see it tested. I don't have the Aussie version. I tested the other ones. I didn't run the V6 F body one. I just didn't have it in time for the testing. But they're both of those were pretty comparable. The ones that we tested. We tested the aluminum one and the composite one for the front wheel drive applications. Going good was a dragway 2 weeks ago, 1270 in the quarter. Nice on the Grand Prix. What was the mile an hour on that GTP? Red Storm. You say in videos that you run the run you show is the most optimized run. Is that self-learning on Holly? No, it's not. I don't do self-learning. I don't do closed loop. I go in and manually optimize the thing. So what we do, I have videos up on this too, Sean, so you could see what the test procedure is. Basically, we start out with low timing, and then we start the motor, and then we run it, load it, and then tune the air fuel with very little timing in it so that it won't hurt itself. And then we optimize the air fuel, and then we adjust the air fuel for, we started at 11, 11.5, 12, and we leaned it out until it stops making power, except on supercharged or turbocharged combinations. I don't normally go leaner than 12.0 on supercharged combinations. And then we start adding timing until it stops making power, unless it's on a supercharged or turbocharged combination. Because a lot of times on those, you can keep adding timing until it breaks, and it'll keep making power until it breaks. And you don't want to do that. So we have optimized combinations, and I don't run closed loop. Do you have an idea what you're going to try to make as maximum boost pressure on the M90? Right now, we're spinning the M90 way beyond what it was rated at. And the boost pressure is going to be a function of the motor that you're testing it on. You can't keep making more and more boost with it. The boost pressure will be a function of what you're testing it on. And so it made 8.5 pounds, spinning it as fast as we could spin it, basically. The Aussie is an air gap. Okay. Have the 3800 L36 F body one sitting next to it. It would have been cool to test all of those. I think we're going to see very similar things, but it would be cool because then we tested the short runner and long runner versions of those with removing part of the runner and then putting the insert in. And so we did that stuff. And it did what you'd expect. It made, more peak power and less power down low when we shorten the runner length because, that's what runner length does. That's what happens when you do that. Daniel, what's up? I just was scrolling back to see what's going on. I wanted to get one of the F-body ones because we did see a couple of those in the wrecking yards. It just didn't happen before the big test. And when I run the Big Bang on the 3800, it will run not with one of those manifolds. It's going to run with a Super Richie ported version of the factory lower blower manifold, and then a plate, and then an elbow, and then a 105 millimeter throttle body blowing into that. It'll just make things easier for us. And I don't want to have that torque that the runner manifolds give us. For the Big Bang one, we want to have it run out at a higher engine speed and not make torque. 102 miles an hour. Car is a turbo car. Now I forgot to take it out of second gear. So I hit the rev limiter. shipping Minnesota to California. Yeah, I wouldn't run them even if they were shipped. That's the problem. I'm done doing that intake testing on the 3800. Have there been any combos that surprised me? Yes, many times. The example I use the most is the 4.8 liter, the very first Big Bang motor. That's why you don't skip the first day of school. Runner length was the first day criteria. Exactly. And amazingly enough, when we change runner length, it does that on an NA motor. It does it on a boosted motor. It does it on a Ford, a Chevy, Dodge, Honda, all of them. I'm just going over some of that stuff with Jimmy on his NSX because he's doing a custom J series Honda intake manifold, which is very, very cool. And we're talking about, paired runners and one robbing from another and how long they need to be. And he's making it adjustable, which is good. And then what the plenum shape should be and all that stuff. And quite honestly, again, like most people, and I keep telling him this because I have to tell myself this, that we're worried about a lot of things that we shouldn't worry about. We're talking about it, which is cool. Because it's always good to have those discussions, but it should just go together and it will make way more power than it needs to make. Because I think he's getting probably near the limit of the turbo that he has. But, that's good. And then we talk to Robert at Force Performance about a turbo because he wants to make, 4-digit stuff with the J series, which is, I'm sure, easily possible. Because he's got cams for it and ported heads. And we want to test a bunch of different things because I haven't seen a lot of that kind of testing on the J series either. I haven't seen people do, hey, what happens when we take all the runner length out? What happens when we put cams in it? What happens when we put ported heads on it? How much boost can you run? Maybe not a good question, but what happens when we run 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds? That's all good stuff. And then, air to water, ice water, all of that stuff. That's all good information. It's one of the reasons I like the idea of ITBs on a turbo application. We're approaching the limit of the parts, torque kills, short blocks. Oh, so you want to do a short runner version? Because an ITB deal is, I don't know that you need to have individual throttle blades to do what you're doing. Because as soon as you put a common plenum on that, it's not an IR manifold anymore. But it's nice to have it adjustable, and then you can shorten it to stop the torque production. Because in some instances, you might want to stop that. We always show that, hey, look, this runner length, it adds all this torque. Well, what if you don't want that? What if because of traction or you're doing a big bang and you don't want all that torque because that's the thing that's going to break it? I saw on your channel information you had several car magazines linked. Are you the editor or the owner of them? No, I don't own car magazines. But before I started YouTube 2 years ago or so, I wrote for the magazines for 20 or 30 years. So I've done this where we've done lots and lots of back-to-back testing, and I've done that for decades now. Didn't Boosted Boys put a J series in a sand rail? I think that they did. The J series is a good motor. In fact, he has an NSX, which he took the C series out because it got hurt and didn't want to go through the expense of replacing the C series, and so I put a J series in, and it's awesome. I think the only thing we need to do, and they probably already have it. I think that Jimmy said that they already have a J series to small block Chevy bell housing kind of adapter, I would imagine. And if not, it's not difficult to make that. In fact, when I went down to West Tech last time, I was hoping that I had the time. I brought the little block over because I have two, which I thought I didn't, but I do. I have two Sprint turbo blocks. I have one complete motor, and then the other one is a block that I have all the cool forge rods and pistons and stuff for. Big money billet. Yeah, those guys are serious. They make a lot of money. What turbo size for a Vortec 350 with a ramjet cam? You just decide on the turbo based on how much power you want. So you don't really pick the turbo for the motor because you can put a 300 horsepower turbo on that motor. You could put a 400, a 500, all the way up to 2000, 2500, 3000, whatever you want, how much ever power you think you can try to make with that. So the question isn't that. The question is, how much power are you trying to make? And then while you're trying to make that decision, you also ask yourself, how much power do I think my motor will actually take? And then that's another discussion about, did you put ring gap in it? Do you have head studs? Do you have a 4-bolt block? Do you have forged internals? What do you have and what are you trying to do? All of that needs to be answered before we can decide on a turbo for that. But the answer for most people is a GT45, cheap one, luckily, because that's a 700 or 750 horsepower turbo, and that's within the range of most people's like street desires. And then you can go up from there if you want to, which a lot of LS guys go beyond that. They go more of the 78, 75, S4 75 kind of range, which, 1,000 horsepower is the new 500. ITB with common plenum to shorten the runner. Could do it with a single, but it's tight. I mean, you have to have a flange to connect the common plenum to, right? To connect the discharge to from the turbo or coming from the intercooler. Wouldn't a throttle body fit there? I mean, it doesn't matter where your throttles are. The motor doesn't care about that. But once you have a common plenum, it's not an IR manifold. It's a common plenum manifold. But, do you have adjustable? Is your ITB adjustable? Can you change the runner length in those sections? Is there a head porting service you'd recommend leaning towards Texas Speed? They do good stuff as long as you have good customer service from them. Then they're good. They're good folks. I've used Total Engine Airflow a lot, but was mostly when Brian Tooley owned them, and I've always liked the porting that they've done. But the guys at West Coast Cylinder Head, there's really lots of good guys, and especially if you're porting an LS head like a factory head, there's lots of good programs out there for it. Does anyone run the new 3-liter twin turbo Jeep engine? I didn't even know that they had that. My father-in-law has a Jeep. It's a turbo, but I think his is a 2-liter though. I think his is a 4-cylinder. I don't think his is a 6-cylinder. Do you have any plans on testing gimmicky ways to make power? Like what? Like leaf blowers and those kinds of things? We that was done decades ago at the show shop. That's the first time that I've seen it done. And they did it with plug-in electric ones. Because they did it way before the guys from I think Motor Trend did it, and maybe guys had done it before that, but this was way back. I've tried oil, I've tried spark plugs, throttle. I want to do some. I want to do that like the Tornado and the like spacers, throttle body spacers. Who would you suggest to port 3800 heads? I don't know. I sent mine off to a guy that was going to be doing it, and then now he's ghosted me. I think the guys at my local machine shop did ours, but I think that there are really good guys. Maybe Eric Weingartner is the guy's name. He might do some for you. I don't know. He's really good. I just don't know if he wants to do iron heads. An electric supercharger. I was just talking to somebody about, Ben from the car farm, about doing something along those lines. I could, because after the flange is just a straight 40mm ID2 with a V-band flange for the throttle body. Yeah, Tyler, I don't know what happened to Monza. I haven't heard from him for a long time. I hope that he's okay, and you know, if it's a set of heads, that's not a big deal for me. Corn, what are you putting that on a 3800? If you're looking at 850 to 900 wheel horsepower on a 3800, the turbo that you put on there is going to be laggy, because you're looking at 1,000 horsepower turbo. So if you want to talk, the precision stuff is good, or talk to Robert at Force Performance. He's got some good stuff too. And that turbo would make less on the 3800 because the 2J is going to be smaller and much more efficient. The back pressure is going to be lower on the 2J. Cars made 681, 758 torque at 24 pounds. Why is the torque higher than the horsepower? Are you taking a bunch of timing out of it? Or is this an automatic? Or do you have a falling boost curve? Mark's Racing Engines, yeah, Eric said he doesn't do iron anymore. I don't blame him. It's awful. I did one chamber and then one intake bowl and one exhaust bowl, and just smoothed out the entry. I didn't even do any porting in the entries and the exits, and that was enough. I was like, yeah, I'm good. I can see why people don't want to do this. Thanks for ever seeing someone spend 8 or 9 hours on a head. Yeah, I don't have that kind of time for that stuff. Drag is the car's main use. Okay. So the numbers that you're giving me, those are on a chassis dyno then? So probably the torque number is a converter thing. Normally these motors, if that's a 3800, if it's a cammed one with ported heads on it, it would normally make more horsepower than torque. Super cheap turbos, multiple prong spark plugs. I've already done that. Plug wires don't do anything. The spark plugs didn't do anything. Electric turbos would be interesting to see if there was anything there. Done lots of super cheap turbos. All that's been done. ST5 turbo stage 5 turbo cam, aluminum heads, 36 manifold. Okay, cool. That's good stuff. And yours is in a Fiero, right? I like those V6 swaps, especially one that has aluminum heads. That's awesome. So I think you told me what's that thing run? What trans are you using on that? With that much power, that's gotta go tens, right? Or 680? Is that thing running nines? I gotta know now. It's a built 4T65E HD heavy duty, has trapped 136. Probably hasn't trapped 137 wheel horsepower, so miles per hour. Should do 140. I would think with that power output. What's that car weigh? Aluminum heads are nice, but that's not a lightweight motor either. 3,000 pounds. Okay. I remember seeing something about an electric motor on the turbo for the EcoBoost Mustangs that helped it spool faster. So they were pre-spooling it? Because that would be kind of cool. Aluminum heads are like 30 pounds less. Yeah, but those aluminum heads got to be a lot better than the. So Eric might port those. Those have to be better than the iron heads. I mean, I know that they're lighter, but they also have to flow more. Fieros are surprisingly heavy. Doesn't that depend on the year of the Fiero? Are the early ones lighter? I don't remember reading it, but although I haven't about the Mustangs and the pre-spool with an electric deal, don't remember reading anything about that, but I haven't looked up those. I need to do some. I need to go do a deep dive. That's a modern SVO Mustang. That's kind of cool. I'm sure all the Coyote guys have to look down their noses at the 4-cylinder guys. It's argued that they are no better than ported cast iron heads. The valves are huge compared to the. It'd be interesting to see flow data on both of them, and like a back-to-back dyno test would be good, because a lot of times the flow numbers don't always tell you what's going on. But we know that iron heads are a full point better in compression than aluminum heads because all that heat escapes. That's not true. I sent flow data from an Aussie shop. Okay. Did I already look at that? I may have. I get a lot of stuff. It turns out those Holley injectors were a mistake. Can't find data for HP tuners, GM stock ECU. Contacted Holley, they don't have it. I looked at it like 6 months ago. Yeah. That's what happens. Sean, what data do you need for the injectors? Because just so you know, I've never plugged injector data into any of the tests that I've run. Other than, and for a long time with the Holley HP, it didn't even matter what size you put in there because it didn't adjust for the flow rate of the injector. We had to do that to the map. They didn't even for a long time, like if you would change injectors, they didn't rescale it for you. So you couldn't take your map that was perfect for the injector that you had, put in bigger injectors, and then tell the computer, okay, I've gone from a 60-pound injector to an 80-pound injector, and now once you put that in there, it rescales everything for you. They didn't do that. You could plug in a new injector flow rate, and it didn't do anything. It didn't make any change to the map at all. It didn't change the flow rate out of the injector at all. I take that back. it made them flow more whatever the injector flowed because the pulse width was the same. I'm not using Holley though. I'm using a stock ECU. Okay, my tuner sent me the data. He has a similar FIC injector, and there's a bunch in there. I mean, I think you should be able to get the injector data close enough to where it's going to run and work. Have you done any diesel stuff? I had a Dodge Cummins turbo diesel back in 2007 or 8, and we did some chassis dyno stuff, but never on the engine dyno. Tim, what's up? Did I not have a poll yet? Is that what the thing is? Okay, so when I'm running a turbo 3800 V6, should I limit the RPM to 6,500? So stock internals. There. What's the world record M90 build? Well, that's the record that I have to break, right? Diesel stuff is too heavy to play with unless you have the proper tools and equipment. Yeah, the guys at West Tech just don't want all of that soot and stuff in the dyno cell. What's the world record M90 build? I don't know. What's somebody made with an M90? Does anybody know? Does anybody have any data? Has anybody made 600 horsepower with them? With a single M90? Has anybody? Well, I take that back. I'm because when you're doing these world records, you get ultra specific. So the world record will be for the 3800 Gen 5 M90. It could be any 3800 because I don't think that the Gen 3 blower is going to make as much as the Gen 5 blower. But there are other versions of that M90 that you can get that are much better housings and stuff. And so they flow more and could theoretically support more power even with the same rotor pack. But that 3800 is the one from that motor. That would be the world record. So again, very, very specific. 460 wheel horsepower. That was likely an iced blower. Intense went high 8s in a 3800 supercharged Camaro. 600 with nitrous. Yeah, no nitrous. The red blower should make more power. I agree. That's right. It's painted red, so it's got to be good. 460 wheel horsepower. So 460 wheel horsepower is the conversion for that to the way that I'm running it, because we're running it with the stock exhaust stuff and we're running it with full accessories. So it's actually not going to be that far off. It's actually going to be drivetrain stuff. And I'd like to see how they configured the motor to do that, because a lot of times you can get rid of a lot of stuff when you're drag racing it. .300 Series 2 have a pretty unfavorable rod to stroke ratio for RPM. I'm thinking that that's not an issue for where we're at. So how's our poll doing? Wow, we're going to be split here. Should I limit it? 53% are saying yes. I think when I did the turbo last time, that's where we ran it to. I think we ran it to 6,500. Yeah. And that's where it made peak power. It made 571 at 13.7 pounds. Let's see here. 14. And yeah, it still made peak power, and actually was still climbing. At 6,400, it made 612.5 and then 612.6. So technically still climbing, but that's where the horsepower peak is. 11.9 air fuel. That's good. Where are we at? 18 degrees above 5,000. It's pretty safe for intercooled and E85. Man, there's 1 million horsepower left in that thing. Maybe not. Wait, the way you test it is comparable to wheel horsepower numbers. No, it is comparable, but when you go from the way that we normally run them on the engine dyno to the way that you run them in the chassis, you're looking at more of a change than just whatever the drivetrain is. Because the drivetrain, all drivetrains are not the same. So the amount that you have, the amount of drivetrain loss that you have, meaning the transmission, if it's a rear-wheel drive car, the transmission, the drive shaft, the rear end, the axles, the tire size, all of that comes into play. But also going from the way that we run it on the engine dyno, normally with an electric water pump, an open throttle body, no accessories, and a free-flowing exhaust. Well, if you change those things too, you're going to have a bigger change going from flywheel horsepower to rear wheel horsepower. But on the 3800, because we ran all of the accessories on it and ran the factory exhaust, now not the catback section, but the stock exhaust manifolds and crossover pipe and all that stuff. So that way it's closer to what's going on in the car minus the drivetrain. So there wasn't a big change in the way that the engine was run. Overbuilt, what's going on? I'd increase peak RPM until we stop gaining power from RPM. Todd, happy to help. I don't remember what question I answered, but I'm glad that I did. There. I'm excited to get I want to get the 3800 back up there. I need to get, Corn might know, what about some sort of MLS gasket, head gaskets for these things? 3800 with the blower limits RPM just because of outlet temps, the turbo, the heads sucks, so you gain so much getting into boost center. I don't see how you could keep making power beyond 7,000. Why does the blower limit RPM because of outlet temperatures? So if we run the blower slow enough to where it only makes 2 pounds of boost, the blower won't limit RPM potential at all. Not because of temperature, because at 2 pounds of boost, it's not going to make any temperature. Header's glowing red at idle on my twin turbo LS. Do you know the issue? Yes, it's going to be either timing or fuel. You either have too much fuel and the fuel is burning there, which means not enough timing at idle. I believe you told me don't use knock sensors. Do you feel the wideband O2 is enough for you to comfortably push the 3800? Or maybe if she goes, no big deal. On my motor, we know where to go to. So we don't ever use knock sensors. On yours, if you want to use it and you have an ECU that can control that, and you haven't made modifications that give you a whole bunch of false knock problems, which is certainly possible, then you can still employ those. But we don't do that on the engine dyno. Bo, hello. I like the comparison for the 3800 and 4.8 liter blower test. I thought it was cool stuff. That being said, don't listen to me. It's not my engine, so I don't care if the guts wind up on the floor. Well, we're already at at least on the turbo motor, we are already at, and I need to look and see, maybe we also had that's what I didn't look at. So that might be the answer there. Oh, great. I don't have that data logged. I bet I was just logging it on the, I'll bet that's what we had though. I bet I was logging that on the Holly. So what you probably have is a rising boost curve on the turbo combination, which helps at RPM. Speaking of head gaskets, do you have preferred type, or is OE good for a mild build LS? Yeah, we use Felpro stuff, or on some of the big bang stuff, we use factory LS9 gaskets. I have not heard from David Vizard recently. A vacuum leak. My roommate is driving 3100 powered Lumina. It's going to need an engine, I'll bet soon. One dead cylinder. Valve not seeing, who knows? My guess is injectors they're good to just test them. I use ZZP MLS gaskets with no problem. Others use stock. Some use Chromatic, copper spray for sure. Okay, I didn't know that ZZP sold MLS gaskets, so they're just having Chromatic or somebody make them for them. So I'll get stuff from them because I have to order a couple of other things from them anyway. James, the poll is, should I limit peak RPM on a turbo 3800 with stock internals to 6,500 RPM? Your argument is that your 254 PSI 3800 will keep making power with an M90 above 7,000. Fine, but for making real power, 14 plus PSI no boost, horsepower, and RPM are all going to cross, in my opinion, before 7,000. I don't know how you could make 14 pounds of boost on a 3,800 at 7,000 RPM on a modified 3.8 liter anyway. Can you even do that? Richard, there's no need to apologize for cross chat. Hoping you'll do another test with different heads, AFR 185s, Extreme Energy 274 cam. On the Big Bang 351, is that what you're talking about? Chromatic ARP copper spray. I don't normally use copper spray unless I'm reusing used ones, but we can try it. I don't think it does anything. I use it normally to fill in potential bad areas, but a lot of times when I do these Big Bang motors, I will surface the deck of the block and then the heads also, just so that they're flat and they have the right finish for the MLS head gaskets. And then I don't put copper spray on them if we do that. I only do that, like I said, when we have used head gaskets that we're putting back on. I'm surprised the exhaust manifold in 3800 didn't make much difference. Yeah, and I've tested it 3 times now with the headers versus the stock exhaust manifolds, and I haven't found any power yet. Excessive motorsports. We already have a 2.6-inch pulley on there, and on the LS motor, we had a 7.5-inch crank pulley, so we had a lot of blower speed. And with the 2.6 pulley on the 3800, we're about 13 pounds, I think. I'd have to look at that and see. I don't know if I have the data. I don't have the Holley data logs to know what that is, but I thought it was right in that range. I still think spin until the power starts falling off. Well, it was on the runs that we made with the turbo already. We were at the power peak at 6,500. Factory 3,800 deck is rough. See, that's one of the things. I need to take this thing apart. I need to take the Big Bang motor apart to change the ring gap. And so I wanted to send it in and just have the deck, just have them kiss the deck so that it's nice. Might be trying to make them, but either way, they seem to hold up. I popped a few gaskets between cylinder 3 and 5, the coolant path. If you deck no spray, I use stock bottoms and don't go without copper spray. Yeah. I mean, it would be a lot more convenient just to spray a set of gaskets and put them on there and not send the block in. But if I'm going to do this, I would rather do it so that, we give it its fair shake, and send it in and at least have that surface. I'm not going to have them bore it or do anything like that, or even hone it, I don't think, because it seems to be fairly well sealed up. Asymmetric turbo setup on the 3800 using the stock manifolds, placing turbo basically in the crossover would be epic. What do you mean by asymmetric turbo setup? You want to spin the turbo from one bank of cylinders? Due to space, I'm going to run a cut and welded LS4 rear manifold on the driver's side of my 91 Camaro to try and clear the power steering pump. Hope it clears the steering shaft. So you're doing a turbo. Is that why you're running that manifold? What did you end up landing on? LIM plus UIM for the Turbo 3800. What are those in reference to? Lower intake manifold and upper intake manifold? Is that what those are designations for? If you have the good intense 3800 heads, you kind of need headers or major manifold porting because exhaust porting on those heads is getting up to 1.75 inches in the widest area. For the science and history, you got to make sure it's right. I know people are going to go to this a lot, I would imagine, if it goes well. And so I don't want it to blow a head gasket. On all the Big Bang motors, we've never had that problem. So we've done the surfacing and clamped them with ARP stuff. And on the Big Bang, on the last 6 liter, the Gen 4 motor, we had the CA625 stuff on there too. So we were pretty secure there, and that made a lot of torque. Lower and upper intake manifolds. On the Big Bang 3800, we'll run the factory lower manifold with a plate and then a Holley elbow that mounts a 102 millimeter throttle body. And the lower manifold will be ported, at least port matched. Overbuilt, you have a new YouTube screen name? Feels good. I'm going to rub Scott's nose in it for sure. Thank God you're not going to blow through the blower case. No, we did that already once. It worked. And in fact, that's the one that made what did it make? 612 or something like that? Yeah, 612. That actually did really well for that was at 14 and a half pounds. So that was perfect. It was actually a little bit above the formula. So it was doing well, which we would kind of expect with the E85. That'll be a swing and miss on the second one. I don't know what that one's in reference to. Oh, not for the Big Bang, James. That's what you're talking about. I honestly think that with even the I would do something to the flat plate on the back. We would make something a little different there. I would probably put an angled plate in there. But I honestly think that with almost anything that we put on the inlet side and the turbo and the intercooler, that we would be able to get to the I broke it limit for power output, even with those things there. The 3800 would benefit from a valve, deshroud, and pocket port. The heads have already been ported that are going on there. That's not a problem. Do you have set times you go live, or is it random? The early one is kind of random. The later one is usually at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Richard, I could have changed it to Blank Stare Automotive. That would be good. If given the option, would you run intake port injection or above valve fuel injection? Similar to supercharged heads injecting over the valve, NA injecting in the runner. If you wanted to make power, I would inject at the entry of the runner. I don't know how long your runner is, but the entry of the runner will make the most power. And I'm going to do another test on that. I've already done it several times. We did it on our Bonneville car. We did it. I have a video up on the Civic where we put the injectors in front of the radius air horns on a IR deal, but it works the same on a common plenum deal. You just have more time for charge cooling. But the extreme going the other way is do direct injection. And what direct injection does is it eliminates all of the displacement that happens from the fuel going through the runner. So if you don't have that, effectively you have more runner flow. True that. I've seen quite a few blown up Grand National and Turbo 3800 engines, especially 3800s blowing through the blower case. Richard, if you had to estimate where you think the torque limit is on the rods or ring landings of the hyperprotective pistons, are you going to shoot for like 550 foot-pounds of torque? No, we're already way past 550 foot-pounds. We were already at 555 foot-pounds at only 600 horsepower. So we've already done that. Bummer, I guess I should have switched it all up. I have the L67 aluminum heads. I mean, I don't think obviously you're doing something right. And if you're running E85, I don't know if there would be, I suspect that there would be less of a difference from the power output of the E85 directing it, because you're going from the intake manifold to going to the head. I mean, how much of a difference is that actually in intake, doing it on the NA one versus the supercharged one? How much of a difference is that in injector position length? Like, how much did you move it up? Is it only an inch? Because that's not a lot. But could we make more power? Yes, on the 85. Are you not running 85? Oh, 3 inches away? Okay. Imagine how sketchy it would be to do a Fiero with this 3800 in it. Oh, to drive, I'm sure. I have a little heart, but I can't see what the word is behind the heart. Why are you guys keeping me here for like an hour and 10 minutes? I'm going to go ahead and close our poll. 58% saying no, don't limit that RPM. And on that note, it is time to go. Obviously, I need to do more 3800 stuff, right? I mean, am I right? Thank you guys all for showing up. If you haven't, please go take a look at the video I put up. 4.8 liter versus 3.8 liter. Same blower, same pulley. Apples, oranges, fig Newtons, pomegranates, whatever. Guys are going to complain no matter what. I will see you guys all tonight.